The restaurant bustled with life. Plates clattered, silverware tinkled, and conversations filled the air. Among the customers, Ethan, a young man with a disability, entered with a quiet confidence. He had worked hard to reach this point. A simple evening out, treating himself after completing a difficult online course. Though Ethan could not speak, he had always found creative ways to communicate. Typically, he carried a small blue notebook where he wrote his requests. But today, in his excitement, he had left it behind. As he scanned the restaurant for a seat, he chose a cozy spot by the window. Sunlight streamed in, casting a warm glow over his table. For a brief moment, he smiled, enjoying the atmosphere. He had earned this celebration. Then came the waiter. A young man named Tyler, juggling a tray and a notepad, approached Ethan's table with a hurried sigh. The restaurant was packed, and he had been rushing back and forth between customers all day. "Table for one?" Tyler asked, barely making eye contact. Ethan nodded and gestured toward the menu, pointing to a dish he wanted. Tyler frowned. What are you trying to say?" Ethan pointed again, slower this time. The waiter exhaled sharply, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Look, I don't have time to play guessing games." Ethan's smile faltered. He gestured toward his mouth and then to the menu, trying to convey his request. Tyler rolled his eyes. "Great. Just my luck." Without another word, he turned and walked away. Nearby, a man seated alone at a corner table watched everything unfold. His gaze, calm yet intense, followed the interaction closely. He had been enjoying his quiet meal, but now his attention was locked on Ethan and the waiter's dismissive attitude. He didn't say anything. Not yet. But his expression made it clear. He was not okay with what he had just witnessed. Ethan sat quietly, his initial excitement fading as he stared at the menu. He had experienced impatience from people before, but something about Tyler's dismissiveness stung more than usual. A few minutes later, the waiter returned, his expression unchanged. "So, do you actually know what you want, or should I come back when you figure it out?" he asked, his voice dripping with impatience. Ethan quickly pointed at the dish he wanted, hoping to avoid further conflict. Tyler glanced at the menu, then at Ethan, shaking his head. "You know, this would be a lot easier if you could just say what you need." Several nearby customers turned their heads at the remark, sensing the rudeness in his tone. Ethan, uncomfortable but determined not to let it ruin his night, gave a small nod and waited for Tyler to leave. Instead, the waiter muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Ethan to hear. "I don't get why people like this even come to places like this." Ethan's stomach clenched. People like this. The words hit harder than he expected. He wasn't asking for special treatment, just a meal, just respect. Across the room, the man at the corner table set down his fork. He had seen enough. As Tyler turned to walk away, Keanu Reeves stood up. His movements were slow and deliberate, his sharp eyes locked on the waiter. A storm was coming, but it wasn't one made of anger. It was something far more powerful. Tyler hadn't noticed him yet, but he was about to. And he was about to regret every single word. As Tyler turned his back on Ethan, ready to move on as if nothing had happened, a calm but firm voice stopped him in his tracks. "Excuse me." The entire atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The voice wasn't raised, wasn't aggressive, but it carried a weight that made everyone within earshot pause. Tyler turned around, eyebrows raised, only to find himself face to face with Keanu Reeves. The waiter blinked in confusion. Can I help you?" Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Yeah," he said smoothly. "I think you can." The restaurant, once filled with lively chatter, had fallen into a hush as customers started to recognize the Hollywood legend standing before them. Even the manager at the far end of the room stopped mid-step, sensing that something important was happening. Keanu placed his hands casually in his pockets, his tone still polite. But there was no mistaking the sharpness behind his words. "I couldn't help but notice how you treated that customer," he said, nodding toward Ethan, who was now staring wide-eyed at the scene unfolding. Tyler let out a small, nervous laugh. "Oh, it's just, a little difficult taking orders when someone can't speak properly." A long silence followed. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained controlled. "Difficult?" he repeated. "Number. What's difficult is watching someone try to enjoy a simple meal while being treated like they don't belong." Tyler swallowed, realizing too late that he had picked the wrong person to be rude in front of. Ethan, still sitting in stunned silence, felt his chest tighten, not with embarrassment, but with something else. For the first time in a long time, someone was standing up for him. Keanu took a step closer, his voice quieter now, but no less powerful. "Let me ask you something," he said. "What do you gain by making someone feel small?" Tyler hesitated, his confidence evaporating under Keanu's unwavering stare. I didn't mean anything by it," he stammered. Keanu's eyes narrowed. "Then maybe it's time you start thinking about how your words affect people." Tyler shifted uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance crumbling under the weight of Keanu's steady gaze. The restaurant remained eerily quiet, every customer now focused on the unfolding moment. Keanu didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone commanded attention. "Respect," he said slowly, "isn't just for people who are easy to talk to. It's for everyone." Tyler opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. He glanced around, realizing that the other diners were watching him with disapproving looks. Keanu gestured toward Ethan, who still sat quietly, his hands resting on the table. This young man walked in here like any other customer. He sat down, he pointed at what he wanted, and he was polite. "You're the one who made it a problem." Tyler's face turned red. He could feel the judgment of the entire room pressing down on him. His earlier dismissiveness had felt so small in the moment, but now, standing under the silent scrutiny of Keanu Reeves and everyone else, it felt huge. The manager, who had been watching the exchange from a distance, finally stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Mr. Reeves," she said carefully, "I'm so sorry for what happened here." She turned to Ethan, her voice filled with genuine regret. "And sir, I sincerely apologize to you as well. This is not how we treat our guests." Ethan gave a small nod, but his expression remained guarded. He had been let down too many times before to assume things would change just because someone said sorry. Keanu, however, wasn't done yet. "An apology is a good start," he said, looking directly at Tyler. "But words mean nothing without action." Tyler exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. His earlier bravado was gone. I was wrong," he admitted, his voice quieter than before. "I shouldn't have treated him like that." Keanu studied him for a moment before nodding. "That's the first step. The next is making sure it doesn't happen again." Tyler swallowed hard and nodded. "It won't," he said. And this time, it wasn't just empty words. The weight of the moment settled over the restaurant. Tyler, still visibly shaken by the realization of his mistake, turned back toward Ethan. For the first time that evening, he really looked at him. Not as someone different, not as an inconvenience, but as a person who had simply come in for a meal, just like anyone else. "I'm really sorry," Tyler said, his voice genuine this time. "I shouldn't have treated you that way." Ethan studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. He wasn't one to hold grudges, but he had been hurt too many times before to accept empty apologies. He needed to see real change. Keanu, sensing this, leaned slightly toward Tyler. "Words are a start," he said, "but the way you treat the next customer like Ethan, that's what will matter." Tyler nodded quickly. "I understand," he said. The manager stepped in, clearing her throat. "Ethan, we would love for you to stay and enjoy your meal. Your dinner is on the house, of course." Ethan hesitated, glancing at Keanu, who gave him a reassuring nod. Keanu smiled. "You came here to enjoy a nice meal, my friend. You should get that nice meal." Ethan, still a little overwhelmed but grateful, gave a small thumbs up before pointing to the menu again, signaling his order. Tyler, still flustered but determined to make things right, quickly jotted it down. "I'll get that started for you right away," he said. As Tyler hurried off, the tension that had clouded the restaurant finally lifted. The other customers slowly returned to their meals, some murmuring about the powerful lesson they had just witnessed. Keanu, however, wasn't done just yet. He leaned toward Ethan, lowering his voice. "If you ever have to deal with something like that again, don't let it bring you down," he said. "People like that? They don't define you. You define yourself." Ethan nodded, smiling for the first time since the encounter began. As the tension in the restaurant faded, Ethan finally began to relax. For the first time that evening, he wasn't focused on the stares or whispers. He was just a customer, enjoying his meal. Keanu remained seated nearby, casually finishing his own dinner, but keeping an eye on Ethan, making sure he was treated properly. The entire energy of the restaurant had changed. A few minutes later, Tyler returned, this time with a completely different attitude. He carefully placed Ethan's plate on the table, ensuring everything was perfect. I hope you enjoy your meal," he said, his voice softer now, filled with sincerity. Ethan gave him a small nod of thanks before digging in. As Tyler turned to leave, Keanu stopped him with a calm but firm voice. "Hey, Tyler." The waiter stiffened slightly before turning back. Yeah?" Keanu gestured toward Ethan, then around the restaurant. "Do you see the difference?" Tyler blinked. "Difference?" Keanu nodded. "Look around. The way people treat each other affects everything. When you're kind, it spreads. When you're cruel, that spreads too." Tyler hesitated, glancing toward the other tables. For the first time, he noticed how much lighter the atmosphere felt. People who had once been uncomfortable were now engaged in friendly conversations. The restaurant felt warmer, not physically, but emotionally. I get it now," Tyler admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't realize how much my attitude could change things for someone else." Keanu smiled faintly. "Lesson learned?" Tyler nodded firmly. "Lesson learned?" Ethan, still eating but listening, looked up and smiled. For the first time that evening, everything felt right. As Ethan enjoyed his meal, the restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations. But this time, the energy was different. The tension from earlier had faded, replaced by something else, understanding. Customers who had witnessed the encounter whispered among themselves, not in judgment, but in admiration. Keanu's actions had changed the atmosphere, but more importantly, they had changed perspectives. A woman sitting at a nearby table leaned toward Ethan and smiled warmly. "You handled that with a lot of grace," she said softly. "You're stronger than most people I know." Ethan, caught off guard by the compliment, gave her a small nod and smiled. Across the room, another customer, a father dining with his young son, gave the boy a meaningful look. "That's how you stand up for people," he whispered. "That's how you make a difference." Even the restaurant manager took something away from the experience. He approached Keanu with an apologetic look. "Mr. Reeves, I want to personally thank you," he said. "I should have stepped in sooner." Keanu shook his head. "It's not about who stepped in first," he replied. "It's about making sure it doesn't happen again." The manager nodded. "I'll be making some changes here, starting with better training for my staff." Keanu's faint smile returned. "That's all I ask?" Meanwhile, Tyler, the waiter who had started it all, stood near the counter, deep in thought. He had spent years taking orders, serving meals, and moving on without ever really seeing the people in front of him. Tonight had changed that. He took a deep breath before walking back to Ethan's table. "I just wanted to say," he started, his voice steady this time, "that I appreciate you giving me the chance to make this right." Ethan looked at him for a long moment before simply giving a thumbs up. No bitterness, no resentment, just forgiveness. And in that moment, Tyler realized that he had just been given a second chance. As Ethan finished his meal, the weight of the evening settled in, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him feel seen. For so long, he had accepted that people would treat him differently. That impatience and frustration were just things he had to endure. But tonight had been different. Tonight, someone had stood up for him. Keanu, still seated nearby, watched as Ethan set his napkin down and signaled that he was finished. The manager approached the table with a warm smile. "We'd love to have you back any time, Ethan," he said. "Your meal is on the house." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise, and he quickly shook his head, reaching for his wallet. No, the manager insisted, waving a hand. "It's our way of making things right." Ethan hesitated, but eventually nodded in gratitude. He had never expected anything more than a meal tonight, and yet he had gained so much more. As he stood up to leave, a soft voice stopped him. "Excuse me?" Ethan turned to see a young girl, no older than 10, standing beside her father's table. She clutched a napkin in her small hands, her face serious. "I just wanted to say, you're really cool," she said shyly. "I hope I can be brave like you someday." Ethan's heart swelled. He smiled and gave her a big thumbs up before walking toward the exit. Feeling lighter than he had in a long time, Keanu watched him go, a satisfied expression on his face. He hadn't done this for attention or praise. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. And seeing the impact it had made, That was all the reward he needed. As Ethan stepped out into the cool night air, he felt different. Not smaller, but bigger. Keanu's words had given him something he hadn't realized he needed: validation. Not just that he belonged, but that he deserved respect just as much as anyone else. Meanwhile, back inside the restaurant, the lesson Keanu had taught was still unfolding. Tyler, the waiter, stood by the counter, replaying everything in his mind. He had come into work today expecting just another shift, but instead, he had been humbled in a way he would never forget. The manager clapped him on the shoulder. "This is your chance to grow," he said. "Don't waste it." Tyler nodded. He wasn't sure how to make up for what he had done, but one thing was clear: he would never treat anyone that way again. Keanu, having paid for his own meal, prepared to leave. Before he did, the manager approached him. "Mr. Reeves, I just wanted to say—" "Thank you." Keanu smiled slightly. "No need to thank me. Just keep treating people right." The manager nodded, taking the words to heart. As Keanu stepped outside, he noticed Ethan standing a few feet away, looking up at the sky. The young man turned, noticing him, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then, Ethan did something simple, yet profound. He gave Keanu a thumbs up. Keanu chuckled, returning the gesture before walking off into the night. The lesson had been learned, the message had been received, and the world, at least for a few people, was now a little bit kinder. The viral moment Keanu never intended to create soon spread across social media. A diner had recorded the entire encounter, posting it with the caption, "Keanu Reeves stands up for a disabled young man after a rude waiter humiliates him. This is how you treat people." Within hours, the video had millions of views. People flooded the comments with praise for Keanu's actions, but more importantly, they praised Ethan's strength. One comment read, "Ethan is an inspiration." Imagine facing that kind of rudeness and still holding your head high. What a legend. Another person wrote, "Keanu just did what we all should be doing, calling out cruelty when we see it. Let's all be more like him." Meanwhile, at the restaurant, the impact of that night didn't fade. Tyler, the once dismissive waiter, became one of the most patient and kind employees in the restaurant. He made it a point to greet every customer warmly, never again making assumptions about people based on how they communicated. The manager implemented training programs on inclusion and respect, ensuring no employee would ever repeat the mistake that had happened with Ethan. Customers who had witnessed the moment returned to the restaurant, not just to eat, but to support a business that had learned and grown. As for Ethan, he kept working hard, building his confidence with each passing day. The next time he went out to eat, he didn't hesitate to take his seat. He didn't fear being treated differently, because now he knew something important. He wasn't alone. And Keanu? He continued being exactly who he had always been. A man who stood up for what was right, no matter who was watching. This story reminds us that standing up for others, no matter how small the moment may seem, can change lives. Have you ever witnessed kindness transform a situation? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring tales.